Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Link Kollel's Yeshiva for Half a Day Legal Holiday Program. We decided to focus on a topic today that is very relevant. As you will see, it's things that we should never know about, but it happens all too often. And being that we feel in the air already the difference ben Yisrael Amim, especially on a day like today, we'll see that it's especially true regarding this subject. There's a huge difference in how a Torah-fearing Jews relate to this topic, and how the Umas HaOlam, and it's rapidly declining, how they are misyachas to this topic. There are going to be terms that we're going to be using that I don't know if everybody is so familiar with, so I asked Dr. Zaghi to give a short introduction on what we are going to be speaking about. I'm going to be speaking about the halachic part, which is good for you guys because it's better that I don't speak about anything to do with refuah. But Dr. Zaghi is going to speak about some of the terms that I'm going to be speaking about. So go ahead, Dr. Zaghi. Thank you for...
Important terms to understand. One is called DNR, which stands for do not resuscitate. That means if a patient either collapses in the field or in the hospital, they lose the pulse, no CPR, no compressions. Another term is called DNI, which means do not intubate. The patient loses their airway, no intubation, no attachment to a breathing machine. So reasons that patients choose these options is like either they're terminally ill, they're very old, that even if they weren't to have CPR, they probably wouldn't survive it, or they would have a really bad outcome post CPR intubation, and that's why they choose to totally avoid being in that situation. Another concept is called comfort care, which is getting more and more common in the hospitals, which means a terminally ill patient, they focus completely on quality of life and relieving symptoms. They stop antibiotics, they stop non-essential medications, and just giving pain meds, other meds to relieve symptoms. Another concept is called palliative care, which sounds like a very nice word. They define it now as an approach that improves quality of life of patients and their families facing problems associated with life-threatening illnesses. The problem in palliative care is that the focus becomes so much on quality of life that sometimes they do certain things that might shorten a patient's life and cause death. So that's kind of a really important concept. And I think we'll... Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the following. Let me give you a little bit of an akdama. Rav Moshe Feinstein writes in his sefer on Chumash, Drash Moshe, he writes about, I'll read you the lashon over here. It's written in the pasuk regarding Ari Miklat, Ki Adam hu yachnif es haaretz, that blood could sometimes flatter the earth. What's pshat? Blood could flatter the earth. Says Rav Moshe that there's a very big difference between Umas HaOlam, how they're makpid on murder is very different to how we are makpid on murder. By Umas HaOlam, by the Goyim, their Iker Kpeda is that there should be a proper Yishuv HaOlam. There should be a good, well-functioning civilization. And that well-functioning civilization is as long as a person benefits society and he's benefiting ha'aretz, then any justification is okay. And that's why there are many wars, says Rav Moshe, and people die in many wars, but they don't have a problem with that. Because as long as it fits into their philosophy that it's good for Yishuv HaOlam, so that's fine. Mashe ein kein bayas. Everything is totally, he says, bechashivus ha'adam, by the importance of man. And by the importance of man, it doesn't matter if it's good for the land serves us. So sometimes the pasuk is telling us that the blood, dam, yach, nifis haaretz, that people are serving the land and seeing what's good for Yishuv HaOlam. And by us, it doesn't work that way. By us, we look at every single minute in a person's life for himself. A person is a binyan, an olam shalem. That's what matters. Okay, with that hakdama, I'm going to start a little bit. I'm going to stand up. It's going to be more, it's easier for me to stand up. So, with that hakdama, I'm going to start speaking about these terms that Dr. Zaghi pointed out, which is DNR, DNI, and interesting, it always happens whenever you're being Isaac and an Indian, Hashem sends you these cases. The truth is, for the past couple months, I've been hearing more and more from doctors, cases that they have that they've been telling me that patients have been intubated and the family decided to remove intubation even though that they knew, or sometimes a feeding tube, and they knew that the elderly patient wasn't going to be able to eat. And basically, they told me they witnessed firsthand how children starved their parents to death. Literally, children starved their parents to death. And many of the hospital staff are encouraging of that. They're saying, well, they don't have such a good quality of life. Good quality of life means also that it's costing them a lot in medical bills, that the insurance always caps it to a certain degree, so it's not good for them either. And that can also explain what the quality of life is. And eventually it becomes so bad that the children feel a lot of pressure, so they say, well, they're suffering. So the importance that we're going to have to see today in certain halachic sources is how much does a person have a right to intervene and be makatzer a person's life, and to shorten a person's life, if at all there is such a concept. And I'll tell you, just yesterday, as I was finishing this year, I was on my way home to light with my family, Hadlakas Neiris, and I get a phone call from a doctor, and he's telling me that he works in a hospital, that there's an elderly patient who's a Holocaust survivor. She's a Holocaust survivor. She's in her 90s. She has a cancer in the stomach, and they put in a feeding tube. And the reason why they put in a feeding tube was because she always told her son that nobody should ever be denied food because of what she suffered through the Holocaust. So she had a feeding tube, but it was irritating. She pulled it out. So they brought her into the hospital. She was breathing heavily. And I don't even think she was conscious. She was breathing heavily, which was a sign that she was struggling. She was going through yisurin. So the family wasn't sure. They were being told that maybe she should be going on morphine, and giving her morphine is going to calm down the breathing, but it's eventually also going to facilitate her death. Because she's going through yisurin and they're giving morphine. The side effects is that she's not necessarily going to be able to breathe as well. So this doctor wanted to know, is he allowed to administer the morphine because it's helping her die? That's a shaila. And that's a shaila. Maybe at the end of this year we'll discuss what the answer to that is. It's really going to depend on the situation and how much morphine. But what's important to know is that, I'm going to start with this. There's an organization in America called Chaim Aruchim. Chaim Aruchim is run by the Agudas Yisrael. The number you could get easily, I think it's like 718 Chaim Aruchim even. It's an organization that helps families deal with end-of-life issues that the people are under pressure. And I spoke to the posek of one of the poskim of Chaim Aruchim that answers these questions. His name is Rabbi Schwartzman. He told me, first of all, two things that have to be mentioned before we start. Number one is that, as we're going to see, everything is a shaila. Everything is a halachic question, and it all depends on the details of that situation. So everything that we're going to speak about now is theoretic. Don't apply it at home. If you chas v'shalom have a shaila, there's a phone number to call. Everything is a shaila. And number two, sometimes a person could be in a situation where he doesn't know what to do. Something happened to the patient. So he wants to know, does he act, does he not act, does he resuscitate, does he not resuscitate? If you don't know, the assumption should be act. Do whatever you can to save the person, and then you'll find out what has to be done. But number one is you act. So those are two important principles that are important to speak about. Now let's get into the halacha l'maisa. There is, in this sugya, a very important question, and it's a contradiction between two sources. And the way how we're going to explain and be meyashiv the contradiction is going to clarify for us what is allowed in signing a DNR. Is signing a DNR or a DNI or an AND ever allowed? And we'll explain these terms, and we'll explain exactly what a person is able to do. So the first source is a Gemara in Maseches Yuma that were given out in the source sheets, which is a person is found under an avalanche, and there's rocks on top of him, and you find that person that he's in a state that he's half dead. He's a goisis. So the Gemara says that you're able suffik chai suffik meis mepachin olav esagal. You're allowed to be mechal Shabbos even in Isser D'Oraisa to save him, even though there might be shilas of Yisur D'Oraisa. Whatever you can do, you're allowed to save that person. The Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Siman Shin Chav Tes Siv Gimel Dalet and Hey discusses to what point you do that. It says like this: Misha Nafla Olav Mapoilis Safik Chai Safik Meis Safik Husham Safik Einusham. You don't even know if he's there. You're allowed to remove the rocks, even though there are many different sfekis, doubts that person might be alive. You still do that. That's Siv Gimel. Siv Dalit. Afilu matzo merutzitz. Even if you found that his skull is crushed, she'enoi yachol lichyos ela lefi sha'a, that he could only live temporarily. He's called a chaye sha'a. Chaye sha'a is he can only live temporarily. Mepakhin ubaykin ad chaytmai. We still are mechal Shabbos, and we see if he has life in him up to his nostrils. Im lo yirgishu b'chaytmai chiyus as vaday meis. If you don't see any breath of life, that means he's vaday dead. Lo yishna pagu b'roishay, lo yishna loy. But what does it say? It says that if a person is a temporary chaye sha'a, mepakhin alav esagal, you are mechal Shabbos. What does it say here? That even if a person that you know is not going to live, presumably he's dying, you still do whatever you can to save his life. So far, so good. That's what's written in Hilchos Shabbos. If you turn to the Ramah in Yoredeya, the second source, Siman Shin Lamites Sif Aleph, and the basis of this Ramah is a Shilte Giborim, one of the commentators on the Rif in Maseches Moed Katan. And this is Hagoyis Alfasi, it's called. And he says the following: the Ramah says that you don't dig a caver by somebody who's at home dying. Say, oh, by the way, we're just preparing things for you. It's gonna distract him. He thinks right now they're thinking about my death. He's going to give up. He's just gonna die. So you don't do that at shiyamos. And on you should never open up a kever that it should be opened up till the next day. And not only that, Rabbi Yehuda Chassid says there's a sakana b'davar. Not only that, you're not allowed to cause for a person to die quickly. Kegoin, like mishu geisis zman araych v'lo yachol liparei. It's very important that if somebody is a geisis for a while and he can't really separate himself from dying, aser lihi shamet akar ve'akeses mitachtav. You can't remove a pillow from under him. Now, not only that, because some people say that the feathers of the chicken that are under are going to cause the person, if you remove them, they're going to cause the person to die quicker. I don't know, the Levush says that the Ramah had some type of tradition that way. You can't put keys under a person's pillow. A person feels that maybe that there's a segula that they put keys under the pillow that the guy's going to die quicker. You're not allowed to do anything of the sort. However, what are you allowed to do? This is very important. If something is causing that the nefashama doesn't want to leave, Let's say you have a person who's a lumberjack, who's cutting wood. You can chaytev eitzim. Or if a person has melach al lishoin, if somebody has salt on his tongue, which is very difficult to understand why that's considered so much better than removing the pillow, but that's what the Ramah says. And they're causing that a person who's dying cannot die, then you're obligated to tell that lumberjack to be quiet and stop chopping wood, because the noise of the chopping wood is distracting the mace from being able to die peacefully. It's not letting his neshama leave. And therefore, mutter lasira. We're going to see the sources say that not only that, you should. The ein bazeh maise klal ela shemeser hamoneya. It's not that considering you're doing an action, rather you're removing a moneya for it to happen. That's what the Ramah says. So let me ask you a question. This seems to be a blatant contradiction to the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Shin Chavtes Siv Gimel. In Shulchan Aruch Siman Shin Chavtes Siv Gimel, it says the guy is dying. You have to save his life. And over here, not only you're not saving his life, you're facilitating for him to die. How does that go together? This is one of the I would say one of the classic stiras that whoever is being Isaac in this subject has to have a proper yishuv, because how you're going to answer this yishuv is going to make a world of difference on what's able to be signed, what's not able to be signed, what's able to be done, what's not able to be done, respirators, ECMO machines, etc. Let's start. There's a Shayil Tzhuva's Beis Yaakov. The Beis Yaakov says that he's brought down in the Pischei Tshuva in the Shulchan Aruch Yoredei Siman Shin Lametes. He says that we're talking about in Hilchas Shabbos about somebody who's dying, but he might not die. He might not die. And since he might not die, so you are able to save him. If you know though that he's vadai going to die, then you're able to facilitate his death. So the Beis Yaakov says. The Shvus Yaakov brings this Beis Yaakov down. He says he doesn't agree. And not only that, the Bir Halacha in Siman Shin Chavtes, which we quoted in the sources, I think source number 3, it speaks about at length what happens if a guy says, for sure is going to die. And this is a fundamental question. A person that 100% they're dying. Their organs have failed. There's no hope for them to keep on living. Are you allowed to be Mechal Shabbos to save their life? And this is also a very important theological question, because if you have to save their life, obviously there's a very important meaning to their life. That even if they're going to die in a day, and this is going to be a very big conflict between us and the Goyim. The Bir Halacha in Dibra Maskil Ela Latisha brings a few reasons why Pikuach Nefesh is Daiche Kol HaMitzvahs. Why Pikuach Nefesh is Daiche all of the mitzvahs. But the classic pasuk that we all say is V'chai Behem. V'chai Behem, you should live by them. V'chai Behem means even if it's temporary life, you are living, and who knows the amount of mitzvahs that you could be makayim. Maybe that person, one more Shabbos that they had to go through, one more minute of Yisurin that they had to go through, is their ticket to Olam Haba. Nobody knows. But the Chai Bohem tells you that even Chai Yishar you're Machal Shabbos. There is one opinion in the Gemara that says that the reason why we're able to be Machal Shabbos to save a life is because Chilal of Shabbos Echad Kedei Sheyishmor Shabbosais Harbe. You should be Machal one Shabbos so that he could keep many Shabbosim. And the ramification, the Pri Megadim says, is that let's say you have an uber, a fetus, who is at the beginning stages and not necessarily considered a life, but they are going to be Shomer Shabbos later on. So maybe you don't have V'chai Bahem, but you have Shishmor Shabbos Harbe. So Lahalacha, we follow both reasons, L'chumra, and the Bir Halacha says that the reason of V'chai Bahem tells you that a person is a Chayeshah and you know that he's not going to live more than a day, you are still Mechal Shabbos. And even if Nisratzitz Roisha, he brings Taisus and Maseches Nida, that Mem Dalan Beis, that is mashma not that way. And Taisus Maseches Nida says that the reason why we're Mechal Shabbos for a person who's terminally ill is because Roiv, even though Roiv Gaisasim Lamisa, even though most people who are deathly ill, they die, but you might have a minority, a miut that lives, and since you're chayshish for the miut over here as well, we will say that we are able to be Machal Shabbos. And according to this, if you know 100% he's going to die, you shouldn't be Machal Shabbos. But the Bir Halacha says, nevertheless, he has another shot in places, so I'm not going to get into. He says the place can say that even if you know 100% the person is going to die, you save his life. So if that's the case, you know that the person's dying by the case of the Ramah, that the lumberjack is outside. You're supposed to save his life. You're not supposed to facilitate him dying. So the Beis Yaakov says we're not talking about a real geisis. Doesn't seem to be that way. The Bir Halacha says even if it's a vaday geisis, he proves from the Gemara, not the Shulchan Aruch Harav. In Shin Chav Tes says even if you know it's a Chayesha and he's going to die. And that's the Shulchan Aruch's lashon also. That you know that he's going to die, you still save a life. So the Beis Yaakov is not accepted le'alacha.
What's the time horizon that's called Chayesha?
What?
What's the time horizon that's called Chayesha?
It's not written. It's not written. It's not clear what a Chayesha. It's not good. What's a geisis? What's a geisis? So Professor Abraham from the Nishmas Avram, he asked Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, what's a geisis? So Reb Shlomo Zalman answered the typical way any Jew would answer. He asked Professor Abraham, "You're the doctor. You tell me what a geisis is." That's what it is. A doctor tells you when a person's dying. A geisis means a person's dying, and that's what a geisis is. Chayesha is somebody who's not going to live a long time. It's not doesn't mean 6 months. It means even eminent. Yeah, Chayesha is different. But I'm telling you, Geisis, there's not a Hagdara. I was bringing an example from Geisis. Chayesha is not clear, at least in the Rishonim, what it could be. So that's why nowadays it's different. Let's say a doctor knows. It's different. That's what Shlomo Zalman said. It's up to that's a Chachma Saroifim. Or Hashem, we have doctors over here, so I'm not going to attempt to get into what Geisis is. But the Beis Yaakov was not accepted. So Rav Vosner says, maybe another suggestion how you could be miyashiv, why a geisis is you're able to remove any restrictions of him dying, and you're allowed to be Michal Shabbos, is like what you were trying to say, that you have a permission to save a geisis. You're not obligated to save a geisis. You have a permission to save a geisis. But on the other hand, if he's dying and it's hard for him to die, you're allowed to remove any restrictions that you can. So it's not such a pasha to answer. It's not mashma that way. If you have to save a person, you should have to save him. Where did we ever find that you have a permission? Yachayil, if you want to, you could save him. This is a stira that, as Rav Gortz was telling me yesterday, if you ever find a very big paisik at a chasna and you want to discuss with them a very juicy halacha, you ask them how to be miyashav the stira between Siman Shin Chav Tes and your Adeya Siman Shin Lamed Tes. How are you miyashav the stira? Well, within the Ramah Gufa, he says a chilik, and he says that if it's Meser Amonea, that you're not doing any action of kum v'aseh, of letting him die, you're just removing any barriers from him dying, then you're allowed to do. Fine. So you're allowed to do that, but then when you find him dying, you have to save him at the same time? How does that jive? How does that go together? So that's a question that the Taz says he doesn't understand the Ramah, why you're allowed to remove the salt from his mouth and you can't remove the pillow. So the Taz argues on the Ramah. But it seems to be that the Levush says, that the Levush, the Talmud of the Ramah says that obviously they had a tradition that removing a car is more of a direct action. It's more of a direct action. It's hard to understand. As I said at the beginning, it's hard to understand this Ramah. But Right. That's what we're gonna go into now. Rabbi Brand is making sure that I'm on time. We have till 11:15. Okay, I'm good. So let's explain how we can be miyashav the steer of the Ramah. And this is the way that the Paiskim Al Kol Panim in the Agudas Yisrael go with this mahalach. And this Yishuv really clarifies many things, and it'll help us understand what to do, practically speaking, halacha l'maisa, which of course, I'm not saying any halacha l'maisa, but at least we'll know where to ask halacha l'maisa, which is the following. The Shvus Yaakov says he had a horrible case about a woman whose head was decapitated and she was pregnant. It's in the 1600s. So they went and they were Machal Shabbos that they cut open her stomach and they saved the baby. And they were asked whether it was okay to save the baby because maybe he's maybe you shouldn't be allowed because he's an Uber, and he says no such thing. Of course you're allowed, and it's a big mitzvah what he did. Not only that, says that he explains that a goysis, except because on the other hand you're not allowed to touch a goysis if she was in the middle of dying. I don't exactly know the situation how it happened, but he writes that although a goysis is dying, but if you're able to be Meisir the goysis, the gesisa lefi sha'a. Listen to the words over here. You're able to temporarily remove the gesisa. You're able to temporarily remove the fact that this person is dying. You're able to do that. In Siman Shin Chav Tes in Orach Chaim, when there was an avalanche and the person was under a rock and the rock was crushing him, you're allowed to be Machal Shabbos to remove that rock, even though that person might succumb to the blows that he got, and he's never going to be able to recover. Right now he's dying, and you're able to get that thing that's making him die, remove it, and save him. You're being Isaac and Refuah. Of course you're allowed. Masha'enkein and Shinlam Mites, the person is dying. By you removing the lumberjack's noise, you're helping him die. And if you take away the pillow, what's happening is that you are causing him to die. That's a prohibition. Causing a person to die is forbidden. If you are being Isaac in helping him live a little longer, you have to do that. Masha'enkin, if a person's dying anyways, and you're being Isaac and just helping him die easier, that would be okay. For example, let's say you had a cancer patient, a lung cancer patient, that is going to die in 2 months. The doctors say that's it. The cancer ravaged his body. He's going to die in 2 months. Right now he has an infection. You can help him get over the infection. Of course you're mechuyev to help him get over the infection. Because right now he has an infection that you could help him, you could heal him, and they'll live for 2 more months. Or they'll live for 1 more month. Doesn't matter how long they're going to live. But what you're being Isaac in right now is not what they're dying and you're helping them die. You're helping them live. Masha'enkein, if a person right now is in the middle of dying and you want to resuscitate him over and over and over again, despite the fact that it's just that he's in the middle of dying and you're shocking him again and you're shocking him again, that's not so pashut. That could be that's allowed. So Moshe Feinstein, yes.
Categorizing between 2 categories of internal and external. That's simply the lumberjack.
No.
Is an external, but it's an internal.
Right, but I'm talking about that. Even if it's going to be more you have to be Meser Monea regarding the avalanche. Let's say right now you're just taking away the rock. So who says? In other words, you're not doing anything by just taking away the rock, but you're mechuyev to do that. So why did you say, I'll just leave him alone, I'm not doing anything? You're obligated b'kum v'aseh to do something to save his life. B'kum v'aseh you're obligated to do to save his life. So you could just say, I'm masir d'maneh, I'm not going to do anything. So why should you, if that's the chilik, you should just say, well, I'm not going to be Isaac at all in healing him. You're not allowed to do that. You have to help and save him. So let's talk about, first of all, let's start with DNRs and DNIs. DNRs, yeah. So the clear distinction between your ideya that you are allowed to facilitate a person to die and Orach Chaim where you have to help a person live even though he's going to die imminently is that in Orach Chaim what you're doing is that right now you will give him a little bit more life. By removing the rock, you will give him a little bit more life. You're right, he might die soon, but right now you're giving him more life. Whereas in Yoredeya, what you're doing is he's dying right now. You're not going to give him more life from what you're doing. He's on the decline. He's in the middle of dying. You don't have an obligation to save him in that instance. You don't have an obligation to save him because he's in the middle of dying. Help him live. Ad kedei kach that the Tzitz Eliezer, we don't paskin this way, but the Tzitz Eliezer in Chelik Tes, Siman Pei Tes, says that based on this Ramah, if a person is on a respirator, I'm very careful what I'm saying because the minig is not like the Tzitz Eliezer, but I just want to bring a dimyan to understand how he applied this Ramah. He said that if a person's on a respirator, and I'm not going to get into the medicine, I'm not getting into the subject at all, but the person, he said, this is the Tzitz Eliezer, what he says. He says the person is dead. The person his brain is dead, and the only reason why he is alive right now is because the respirator is breathing air into his lungs. The respirator is breathing air into his lungs. Tzitz Eliezer says that not only would you be allowed to remove the respirator, because he's in the middle of dying and you're not doing anything, you might be obligated to remove it. That's what I was saying. You might be obligated to remove it because the Ramah says you're supposed to help a person. You're not supposed to make it more difficult for the person to die. And if they put on the respirator, you should have to remove it. Rav Moshe Feinstein in Igros Moshe, that same tshuva a little later on, I don't have it quoted, he says that if the respirator is on, you're not allowed to remove it because the person might be still living. If the oxygen ran out and the person is clinically dead, it could be you don't have an obligation to replenish the oxygen. What?
It's not no year.
Because there's no tanks. So, right. So, but that's what Rav Moshe says, and Lamaise, that what I spoke to the Paiskim in America, that nobody follows the Tzitz Eliezer. Nobody allows the removal of machines, and I think the reason is that we are not clear what type of life there is this person right now. I tell you, I was involved in a case in Canada where a good friend of mine's son, Lo Aleinu, suffered an asthma attack, and he was without oxygen for 45 minutes, and he went into a coma, and he was legally brain dead. And in Canada, they put huge pressure, and they just passed a law that the doctors should have a right to decide to pull the plug. And literally the whole community in Toronto went down to the court to advocate on his behalf, and he lived another 4 months on this machine until he passed away. Now, Dr. Zaghi tells me the only reason why they should pass away is because of other complications like urinary infections or pneumonia or the like. But they're not going to. In other words, a person could live for much longer with that machine. I'd like to know why is it that at one point they can't live on the machine. I mean, Dr. Zaghi says it's only because of other complications. I want to look into that more, but of course I'm going into a realm that's not mine. So it's puzzling to me. It's puzzling to me, but that's what happens. That people are on respirators for a long time, and the heroes, you cannot remove a respirator. But I'm just saying that the Tzitz Eliezer wants to suggest from this Ramah that if a person's on a respirator, I mean, and there's nothing else going on in his body, he's totally dead. So you're just being ma'akiv the neshama from totally leaving.
What does dead mean, though? What does dead mean?
So that's the subject that we would need another 3 hours to get into. That's why I'm not getting into it right now. But I just wanted to bring this Tzitz Eliezer for a dogma how he applies the Ramah Halacha L'maisa. So getting back to do not resuscitate, do not intubate. There are patients that want to sign an order that do not resuscitate me, which means, let's say they have a heart attack, God forbid, and you have to resuscitate them. So you're going to say, well, the person is dead now. Why do you have to do anything? There's a hasara samonea. So here there's a clear halacha in Choshen Mishpat, which we all know, which is leisamoid al dam re'echa. You see your friend drowning, you know that you could save him right now. You have to save him. You have to resuscitate him. You have to do whatever you can to save him. If a person doesn't want to be intubated for the same reason, because they're going to say that the quality of life is not going to be the same, you have to help them live. You have to help them live. The question is going to be where it's eventually going to be a stage where the person is terminally ill and they're dying. And here it's going to really matter how we explained the Ramah and the Shulchan Aruch on what the distinction is. If a person is in the process of dying and you could keep on resuscitating them, But what's going to happen if you keep on resuscitating them? They're just gonna come back and die again. Then it could be there's room to talk about DNRs. It's a very specific case. Now there's something else called, as we mentioned, the ANR, which is allowing natural death, which is basically it's not only do not resuscitate, but it's let them die comfortably. That means you remove medications, you don't medicate them, you don't give them antibiotics, you let them die comfortably. That's not allowed, and that the poskim will never be matir, because that's just speeding up their death by causing them to die more, by not giving them antibiotics and things that should help maintain them. But that's not the moment when a person is in the middle of dying. I'll tell you an unbelievable story that I saw written by somebody called Rabbi Yaakov Goldstein, and he has an article, very good article about this that you could look online about DNR, and he mentions a story with the Lubavitcher Rebbe that on the 27th of Adar, the Rebbe, 1992, the Rebbe received a debilitating stroke in the oil. 2 years later, 4:00 a.m., the Rebbe received a second severe stroke while at Manhattan Hospital, which at the time left the Rebbe with 98% brain damage. The doctors caring for the Rebbe explained the seriousness of the situation to the Rebbe's secretaries, who acted as his legal health proxies, and that they needed to consider signing a DNI consent form. He was 98% brain damage there was. The secretaries decided to send this halachic question to one of the world's leaders, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. So they sent the question to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach with instructions that his name shouldn't be mentioned anonymously. So when Rabbi Shlomo Zalman was asked this consent order for the anonymous patient, he said that he says, listen, I can't answer these questions because I'm older already, and these are such heavy and important questions. I don't want to come to Shamayim having to give din v'cheshbon on questions that I shouldn't have answered at my advanced age. So the Rav who was asking him, this Shaliach, said he had no choice but to reveal to Rabbi Shlomo Zalman that we're talking about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and only he can answer the question. So Rabbi Shlomo Zalman replied the following: come back in an hour for an answer. After that hour, the renowned Paisik replied that every moment of the Rebbe's life is precious, and thus they are to do everything possible to keep him alive, even if it entails resuscitation. And this is unlike Rabbi Shlomo Zalman's approach. He writes that a lot of times, if he knew that the patient was dying, he would allow a DNR form. As a result of this psak, when the Rebbe later went into cardiac arrest at 7 o'clock a.m. Shabbos, the 2nd of Tammuz, they immediately began efforts of resuscitation, and indeed, after 50 minutes of CPR, the Rebbe's pulse miraculously returned and stabilized. The doctors have never seen anything like this before, that a pulse returned after 50 minutes. They were absolutely amazed and shocked that they saw a ghost, as from a medical perspective. This was literally a resurrection. That evening, 1 o'clock a.m., Motzei Shabbos, the Rebbe had a further cardiac arrest, and this time the resuscitation effort did not bear fruits. The stalkers of the Holy Tzaddik occurred on the special day of Gimel Tammuz. See, unbelievable that you could keep on resuscitating a person. Are you obligated to? No. If a person's dying, you're not obligated to. But to sign a DNR, which the hospitals want you to do because of quality of life, a person might have more pain. So we don't find in the Torah, this is a very heavy statement I'm about to make, but we don't find in the Torah that facilitating pain is a reason that a person could take away his life faster, or do actions that his life will be taken away faster. I'm not talking about euthanasia over here. I'm talking about taking away his life faster. I don't know if Rabbi Weiner is going to, Rabbi Jason Weiner is going to speak about this in the next few minutes, but there is heavy pressure on the hospitals to encourage people to end their life quicker. Palliative care many times means that it's on the decline. So I'm going to get back to the question that I started with, which somebody asked me yesterday, which was what happens with this patient, this 92-year-old lady was a Holocaust survivor, and the family wanted her to get morphine to be more comfortable. Now, what does that mean, getting morphine? That's why you have to understand the terms that they're speaking to you. they're speaking to. Giving morphine means is that they are switching from healing her to letting her die, which is Dr. Zagi called comfort care. Letting her die in a comfortable manner, which means they would also remove antibiotics. They would also remove anything else that's going to help her get better. They want her to die peacefully without yisurin. Now, we want to make sure a person doesn't have yisurin, obviously. But in a case where we're basically mekatzer her life, that is not a simple situation at all. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman writes in one of his tshuvas that morphine is allowed to be given. This is a chiddush, but morphine is allowed to be given even though it's going to speed up the person's death, but that's not happening right away, and that's for the patient's yisurin. That's not a direct causation that's allowed. But even if morphine is able to be given, it has to be given at a low amount that is helping right now, but not direct causation that's going to cause her to decline rapidly right away, and not to remove any medications and antibiotics that are being given. And that indeed was the answer to the question, was that morphine could be given as long as you're not stopping all of the other medical care that woman is getting. And when this doctor went back to the patient's son and told him this, the patient's son actually thanked him and expressed his appreciation that until now he was only hearing about how they could get rid of his mother quicker. And this was the first approach that he got that actually to help take care of her in a way that is respectable but not hastening her death. And this is something that's very important to keep in mind. And there's I was telling Dr. Zagi yesterday that it's a new pshat in Bikur Cholim nowadays. Bikur Cholim used to mean that you're giving chizuk to the patient. It's not only that. If you are by the bedside, you are making sure that the hospital is not going to do measures that could, chas v'shalom, harm the patient. Hospitals do not like from Yidden because they know that they will advocate that the patient lives longer, and that's not necessarily to their best interest. The Agudas Yisrael claims that the way to deal with this is that you don't go head on with the doctors, you don't confront them, you communicate and you try to work together. Many doctors are very passionate and wonderful people, and you tell them the perspective you're coming from, and they have found much success with that. Instead of going into legal battles, which you won't have time for, you actually, it's called hishtadlus and shablon, is that you advocate and you have other people advocate for you, but you be by the patient's bedside and you show the hospital staff that you care. And if you show that you care, it's just like teachers, that if the parents show the teachers that they're involved with their children, the teachers will do a better job with their children. It's the same thing with patients and with whatever patients you have in the hospital from your beloved family. You show the hospital that you care, and they will reciprocate, and they will put more effort in making sure that a person could live longer.
I want to say three things to add in. When you have a DNR or DNI, patients don't know this, but usually doctors take it as like a softball approach with the patient. So they see a patient has DNR, DNI in the chart, they're not going to be as aggressive sometimes. Second thing is palliative care doctors, they hate Orthodox Jews because we're so against like a lot of their approaches. So it's like always going to be confronting you and sometimes a little aggressive. And with morphine, when morphine's ordered, sometimes a lot of hospitals order, but then it's given to the nurse to titrate up or down. Sometimes some nurses will titrate up and up and up and up on their own discretion. That can really expedite the patient's demise. So.
Yeah, questions. I mean, I'm not a basic in this, so
we said no DNR, but with the difference from Shlomo Zalman, it sounded like you were saying was above being on. So what were they doing from Shlomo Zalman that was not the standard that you would say?
But the Rebbe was in his last moments and he was dying, but they were keeping him. They were getting him back and back and back.
If you don't say no DNR, then that's what's going to happen, isn't it?
So certain cases, I would say when a patient is terminally ill and they're on a decline, then that's when you ask a shaila. That's when you ask a shaila and you get a psak that a DNR or a DNI could. And remember what Dr. Zagi said. It's usually a carte blanche that they say, okay, that we don't have to worry so much about it.
Is there a nonlinear halacha between a DNR and a DNR?
I don't know.
Most of the time, it's a combined thing. In the hospital, most of the time, it's a combined thing. Like, you can't really do a resuscitation unless you can intubate. So usually, tell patients either you're combined or you're not at all.
Okay.
There's also something else that the nursing homes, the person sign, or hospices, DNH, which is do not hospitalize. That we usually never allow because we have to know the situation where they're in before we're able to pass such thing. Without further ado, we have a great honor of having with us Rabbi Jason Weiner, who's the chaplain in Cedar Sinai, and we're very happy and fortunate to have him over there. And he benefits the community tremendously. Thank you very much for joining us. You want to stand? You want to sit? Stand.
Express my thanks to Lebhar for putting together this program, beautiful program, and we also, as a community, to have Rabbi Weiner, not just in his capacity of being the senior rabbi and the senior chaplain at Cedar Sinai, but as a great resource for Rabbanim to understand what's going on there, and also for the whole community. Not that he isn't busy already, but people should understand that it's not simple to have, not most hospitals, we don't have that access. With Rabbi Weiner there, we know that things are being done with the sensitivity to human needs and to halacha. To have that combination is very, very special, and people should use Rabbi Weiner and use that resource that we have. It's a tremendously special opportunity to have him here. You have a question?
Well, I wanted to just make a statement.
Yeah.
I work in a dialysis center. I'm a registered dietitian, and we're finding that insurance companies are pushing DNRs on some of our younger patients who are stable, who are healthy, but they need dialysis because their kidneys have failed. I had a POC with a doctor on Monday who was absolutely outraged at the fact that some of his younger patients were getting DNRs. And one of that stopped. I mean, that was just, this is not a Jewish environment, obviously these were not Jewish patients, but, so this feeling about DNRs it's something that's across the board. It's not just among Jewish people. It's like, hold off, let's completely evaluate the patient in order to make that
Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. We're not surprised. It's unbelievable.
I'm going to share more facts on the ground, I think, in these areas. It's quite shocking. Hanukkah is about the culture kampf. That culture kampf still continues.
Do you mind if we stand here?
Sure. Why don't we?
Can we move
Just one more quick technical note. There is the mincha today will take place here in the Beis Medrash at 1:05 or 1:05. 1:05. There will be another mincha. It's at 12:35. Please we're asking those that are in the shir not to walk out of the shir for that mincha. It's covered for the speakers. So at 1:05, mincha is right here, and the other mincha will take place upstairs. And we are absolutely makbid that mincha not take place in the back. If you see somebody congregating there, please tell them to go upstairs because it will interfere with the program here. It's a pleasure and honor to introduce Rabbi Weiner to share with us.
Thank you. It's great. It's really, really a pleasure to be here. I'm a huge fan of Link and Rabbi Brander and Rabbi Lebhar, two of my favorite rabbis around, and so it's really quite an honor to speak with all of you. After having heard a shir, I really apologize that I was late and then I'm going to have to leave after, so I really would have loved to hear Rabbi Lebhar's shir, and I'm going to find the recording. And after Rabbi Lebhar gives a shir, I'm not going to try to give a shir as well. I would have nothing to add, of course. So my goal is more to share some experiences in the hospital and just to share a little bit about what I see and what some of the dilemmas are and some of the challenges, and just to give you a kind of a feel for some of the issues that we face on the ground. But of course, for Shilas and for Psak, of course, you have Rabbi Lebhar, Rabbi Brander, and others here that you can
Chaim
turn to.
Aruchim. I don't pass Kedisha. 718 Chaim Aruchim.
There's excellent resources. But like Rabbi Brander said, though, if I can ever be helpful to anyone in the hospital in any way, just in terms of navigating things, please never hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to try to help. Just as I start to think about some of the stories that are related to what we're talking about, I could spend the whole time telling stories, which I won't do, but I remember a case that I had once where I got a call from someone I didn't know who it was. I remember I answered the phone. I remember the words were, Rabbi, I'm just changing very minor details, but she said, Rabbi, you performed my grandmother's funeral, and now I have to ask you to perform my daughter's funeral. And I didn't even know, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, tell me what's happening. And she says, well, my daughter had a sudden brain aneurysm, and she's in the county hospital, and the doctors say there's no chance of recovery, and they're giving us pressure to extubate, and of course, they say she's suffering, and we don't want her to suffer, but, I am an observant Jew. I told them I can't do it without my rabbi's permission. Again, I didn't know I didn't remember who it was. I'm sure she had another rabbi, I think, but anyways, she was calling me, I think, for permission, and I said to her, well, so when did this happen? She says, yesterday. So I said, she had a brain aneurysm yesterday, and they want to withdraw everything today already? She said, yeah, Rabbi, come on, it's cruel and unusual to make her go through this. What, would you give us permission just so we can tell the doctors? Our rabbi said yes. So I said, first of all, this is something that I wouldn't be able to say myself. I need to talk to some people. And also, it just seems very fast. One day? So she says, yeah, but the doctors say she's suffering. So I said, could you get another opinion? Could you ask for another opinion? And she says, oh, okay, I'll see what I can do. Next day, she calls me back again. Rabbi, it's really, the doctors say, what are we torturing her for? So I said, what did the second opinion say? She has no chance? They said, we didn't get a second opinion yet. So I said, also, I need to talk to people. I said to her, I remember, it's almost the weekend. Let's give it the weekend. Over the weekend, make sure to get a second opinion. And then call me. Because this is a big issue that I'll mention in a minute. I mean, it is a big problem when people get stuck on a respirator, right? Because halachically we can't take them off. And it does become an issue. So I want to figure out how we're going to help you with this, but we're not rushing into this. So the weekend goes by, and I was thinking about it a little bit. I was figuring, okay, I'm going to have to call, to call a post-sick and discuss this and figure this out. I'm not sure what we're going to do exactly, but we're not rushing to extubate here. Monday goes by, nothing. Tuesday goes by, nothing. Wednesday, at a certain point, I'm like, okay, I guess maybe they're just calling someone else at this point. I remember Wednesday night, there was an event at the Federation that I had to go to. So I'm there, and there was I don't want to say anything bad, I'm not trying to say anything bad about anyone. There was a rabbi who's not Orthodox that I saw there, and this rabbi comes over to me and says, oh, you're the rabbi at Cedars. What a wild case they had at Children's Hospital, at the county hospital, wasn't it? So I said, which case? I started describing, oh yeah, they called me last week. And they said, isn't it amazing? I said, what's amazing? They didn't call me back. What happened? They said, oh, yes, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have brought it up. I said, what do you mean? They said, oh, they called me on the weekend, and they said, the rabbi at Cedars is too Orthodox. He wouldn't let us. So would you say it's allowed? Because come on, the patient's suffering. Would you allow it? So this rabbi said, yeah, it's fine. So luckily, in hospital, I'm not trying to say anything bad. I'm just trying to show different perspectives. Sure. But okay, fine. Maybe I am in a nice way. I'm trying to be nice about it at least. So,
you tell me that.
So
the Israeli and the American.
I'm still saying it. Don't worry. But I'm just trying to be political. So, anyways, luckily in hospitals, this is a problem in all hospitals. It's at Cedars too, but everywhere. The problem is weekends. Weekends and holidays are very inefficient days in hospitals. You have a hard time when you putting in orders. Things take longer, just less efficient. Less people are around, and it's a big problem with financially even with hospitals. They lose money on the weekends because they order something on Friday, and nothing happens till Monday. So on Saturday, this woman tells the doctor, "Yeah, you know what? It's fine. We're gonna withdraw all care." But the order gets put in. Nothing happens Saturday. Nothing happens Sunday. Still Monday, nothing's happening. Monday afternoon, the mother starts to notice. You know what? I think there's some improvement. Is it just wishful thinking? I don't know. She says to the doctors, the respiratory therapists come to extubate. She says, I'm second thinking myself now. Maybe we shouldn't do this so quickly. I say, well, if you want to get a second opinion, we can order that. So they get a second opinion. It takes another day. By then, there was some improvement. Now, brain aneurysms with blood, it's a blood bleed, a brain bleed with blood, right? Did I say correct? So the blood can recede also. So what they were seeing was that the brain bleed was receding, it was improving. And by Wednesday, this patient had woken up. That day, when this rabbi saw me, this was the miracle, right? They say, oh, it was a miracle, because we said you could take it out, and then they survived. And to make a long story short, the woman and the patient came to my office like 2 months later. The patient literally walked in, and the mother said, I want you to meet the patient whose life you saved. Now, I know I'm not just trying to be modest here. It wasn't me that saved the life. It was Halacha. I would never have told her when she first called me, don't do it so quickly if it wasn't for the fact that Halacha forbids this, right? Of course, medically, also, when I talked to some people, it was also right medically. I mean, what's the rush? Some things, they take time, and you need to... So this is a big issue. On the other hand, I'll try to give you different perspectives. On another extreme, when we talk about DNR and extubation, there was a case that I remember because it impacted me a lot, where there was a family, and I apologize, I'm trying to change my details. It's very possible that some of these stories are happening or about people that you might know, but I did change details with that last story. I'm changing with this story as well. But the gist you get, there was a family that their approach was DNR is always usher no matter what. They were not allowed DNR. So, in fact, the patient, at one point, the patient was, at this point, an adult, weighed less than 80 pounds, was really in the dying process, and the doctor was explaining that resuscitation at this point would only break ribs. It had no chance. Until this point, the code had been full code, resuscitate. At this point, it was not going to work. The patient would die. The son of the patient, the doctor says this, stood up and said, yeah, well, if you don't resuscitate my parent, I will grab your hands and I will force you to do it. So you could cut the tension with the knife at that moment. So the doctor then gets up. He had a lot of chutzpah, this doctor. He was a Jewish doctor. He gets up and he says, what a shame that you're not going to be here for your parents' last moments. I'm going to call security now. And he walked out. Meanwhile, the child of the patient's literally shaking. And I remember I put my hands on his shoulders. He almost hit me. And I said, maybe we should call your rabbi. So he said, my rabbi told me, do everything always. So I said, well, maybe in this case, let's call the rabbi and say this situation. He said, what, you say my rabbi's wrong? So I said, chas v'shalom. But every case is different. Let's call. So we called the rabbi. The rabbi said, yes, that's what I said. Do everything always. So I said, here's the case. This patient has cancer all over her body. God forbid. She's not even interacting anymore. Weighs less than 80 pounds now. She weighed 200 pounds before. She's dying. The doctors think she has a day, 2 days at the most. They're not even willing to do it. So the rabbi said, oh, in that case, yes, the DNR would be allowed in that case. So the son said, oh, okay. Can we call the doctor back and tell him not to call security? So, it's sometimes this case, of course, in general, and I'm not sure, I didn't hear what Rabbi Lebhar said, everything, but in general, we do err on the side of prolonging life. Of course, we err on the side of not having a DNR, what we call full code. But of course, it's case by case. There's situations. And so we can't just have a very simple rule. We have to call the rabbi, call the posek, and figure out each case as they arise. I remember another case a similar case, where a patient, the family's demand always was DNRs against Halacha. We are against DNR. We're having family meetings, we were navigating, and everything was DNR is off the table. One day a child of the patient comes to my office and says, Rabbi, how do we make sure that my loved one is no code? Now, no code is how we say in the hospital, DNR. So I said, I'm really confused. What do you mean? I thought the whole goal was no DNR. They said, no, we want no code. We don't want DNR. We want no code, though. So I said, no code means DNR. I'm confused. They said, let me explain to you. I don't know what I'm saying, this person. I don't know medical language. I don't know what I'm saying. Let me explain to you. We've been saying DNR is against Halacha, so we don't want it. Then the patient in the room next to us coded. Coded means their heart stopped. And we watched what happens. We watched them pounding on the chest and intubating and doing everything, and there was blood everywhere, and they were screaming, and then the patient died. And it took an hour and a half. And we said, we don't want that. So whatever that was, we don't want. So now we said, okay, we need to call your rabbi and discuss this, because there's things that we can do, and there's things that we don't want to do. We have to figure out what we want and what we don't want. Sometimes it's not always so bloody and scary. Sometimes it is. It's all case by case. I hope this is in accordance with what Rabbi Lebhar said. I mean, we have general rules. Like I said, we err on the side always of prolonging life. And we want to keep people alive. We have to know the specifics in each case about exactly what we're doing. The real dilemma that comes up, the most common dilemma, probably if you had to ask me what's the most common shaila that happens in the hospital, is with extubation. When someone is intubated, first of all, the question of when to intubate, when do we put in the breathing tube, the endotracheal tube that's connected to the respirator that helps them breathe, and when do we take it out? The dilemma is usually most significant, first of all, putting it in. I'll give you an example of a shaila that we had. I got called to the emergency room that a patient had dementia and choked at home. Choking is really the most common cause of death in dementia patients. It's not clear if it's a terminal illness, it sort of is, but usually they don't die from the dementia, they die from a result of it. Patient chokes at home. So the patient had been very clear with his family, it was really end-stage dementia. He had been clear throughout his illness that he does not want to be on artificial life support. But of course, he also said, I want to follow halacha. So you'll ask the rabbi. If the rabbi says, you'll do what the rabbi says. But if I have a choice, I don't want it. Patient comes in, and what they did in the ambulance, when they resuscitate someone, what they call in hospitals is bagging. They were bagging the patient. That means that they have the endotracheal, they're intubated, but they're not connected to a respirator because you don't have a respirator in someone's house or even in an ambulance. The nurse or the tech or the EMT bags the patient. They pump a bag every 5 or 6 seconds to keep them oxygenated. And they do chest compressions. So the question became, they get to the emergency room, the nurse is still bagging. They're not on a respirator yet. The question the wife has is, okay, he doesn't want to be on a respirator, he doesn't have to be, but of course, if it's beneficial, we'll do it. She's waiting now. The doctors are going to do tests to determine how bad was the brain trauma from not breathing. It had been a while before the paramedic got there. It's like 10, 15 minutes before they did anything. So it could be very, very severe brain trauma, such that there's no chance for meaningful recovery. We wouldn't necessarily extubate someone in that case. We definitely wouldn't. But the question is, would we put them on the respirator, right? So the doctor came back. They did their imaging. The doctor said the brain trauma is very severe. I do not see any chance for meaningful recovery. This person's brain trauma is so bad they might live, but they will not be able to interact in any way whatsoever. So the wife felt, well, in that case, this is what he said, he did not want to be put on a respirator. So she felt, I don't want to put him on. But the question was, he's being bagged right now. So he is intubated, and there's a bag pumping every 5 seconds or so. So a respirator is one thing. To take a person off a respirator, you have to withdraw. We say in halacha usually, you can withhold interventions sometimes, but you cannot withdraw them if withdrawing leads to death. What was this case? Is the withdrawal, first of all, is it withdrawal? Because you're not pumping every second. You're pumping not pumping constantly, it's every 5 seconds or so. So can they stop pumping? This was the shaila. So she asks me. Of course, this is obviously not something that I could. This is really DNR fashos mamish, and this is for a posting. So I don't know if I want to give everyone's names because I don't know if I asked them permission. But I called a very prominent posek who I call with my shilas here in town. I assume he would give me permission, but I'm just not going to. You all know him. I asked him, "What do we do in this case?" He said, "Wow, this is a hard one." I said, well, they need to know now. I'm calling you from the emergency room, and the nurse has been pumping for 2 hours now. So he said, I need 5 minutes. I said, okay, we really need to know now. Luckily, one great thing about this posting in particular is that not only is he always available, he does call back. He says he's going to call back, he calls back. So I said to them, 5 minutes. He calls me back in 5 minutes, and he says, I think it would be mutter to stop the pumping in between pumps. If this is a case, the doctor's telling you there's no chance for meaningful recovery, this is a patient who's in the dying process, they're terminal, they're chayisha, it would be allowed to stop the pumping. Because it's not withdrawing, it's withholding. It's like stopping a code. Just like if someone's resuscitating and after 2 hours, they're not being revived, there's a certain point where you can stop. It's sheval tase, it's not actually withdrawing. So that's what he told me. That's what I told them, they stopped, and that night, late at night, the patient died. That night also, interestingly, Chaim Aruchim called me. Chaim Aruchim, one thing that I like about them is that they call me all the time when there's a shayla in Cedar Sinai, not to ask for my psak, but because they're very good at saying, if there's a case, we need to know the details. We're not there. We're in Lakewood. We're in Brooklyn. So let's get someone on the ground to report back to us, what do you see? What's happening? Who's this doctor? Some doctors exaggerate in one way. Sometimes doctors exaggerate in a different way. This is why, just as a side point, there's a Rav Hoffman at Weiner Yeshua in Bnei Brak, I spent a day with him once to get to know him, how he's the Rav of their hospital in Ma'anei Yeshua. Everything in Ma'anei Yeshua is halacha. It's a Haredi hospital. So much so that when I was with him at one point, he gets an emergency call. He's constantly getting emergency calls. And I'm following him around just watching. Wow, one day Cedar Sinai will be like this. And give me another 100 years. So we get this emergency call. What's the emergency? Come to the security booth. I'm thinking, what's the Rav need to pass into the security booth? We show up at the security booth. The security guard's there, and he says, Kvod Arav, this woman's trying to bring in food for her daughter. I stopped her though. Don't worry, I stopped her. And she's crying. My daughter is so sick, and she only eats my cookie. She's not eating the hospital food. Please, it's pekuach nefesh. So the rabbi says, okay, don't use our plates. Don't tell anybody that I gave you permission, and it's just this one time. And he lets her through. The security guy says, thank you, Rabbi. He goes on. I thought, wow, this is the job. The security booth there at this hospital, they're not checking for bombs and guns. They're checking to see if something's not in the hadron. They're checking the hashgacha there. So he told me, one thing he told me, just as a side, I'm mentioning this because he's told me that, they have Rav Chaim, right, in Bnei Brak. And I asked him, I said, what's the involvement of the Gedolim in the hospital? Because they all are on the official, halacha committee. But he said to me that even Rav Chaim has a rule that if someone asks him a halacha medical shaila, Rav Chaim won't paskin until Rav Hoffman is involved with the case. Rav Hoffner, sorry. Or the posting of the hospital, because they said, when someone says the doctor said X or Y, Rav Chaim, all he hears is that's what the doctor said. But I know the doctors. I'm working with them every day. So I can give him the full color. I can say, here's what this person said, here's who they are, here's what they mean by this. And because you have to have the details. So anyways, that was a long side point, but I just think it's interesting. Chaim Aruchim calls me that night. Because they have a shaila in Cedar Sinai, they just want me, they said, could you just go in, see the patient, talk to the doctors, give us your perspective as we have to develop our psak. So that we can hear, just hear the whole story. It's the proper way of paskin, right? You do your research. It's responsible. So anyways, I said, you know what, I have you on the phone. I had a shaila today, I'm just curious what you would have said. Because it was a tough shaila. So I told them, they said, we would have said, you have to continue bagging, put him on a respirator. So I felt a little bit bad. I didn't tell the posik that I called, I just felt bad. The next day, that posik, another reason why I respect him, he calls me up and he says, I'm feeling guilty about our psak last night. I'm just feeling funny about it. Could you call Rav Asher Weiss? And I did ask his permission. Could you call Rav Asher Weiss and see what he would say? So I did call him, and he agreed with that posting. So it was a little bit of machlokas posting, but he agreed that in this case, it's considered shev val taseh to stop in between pumps, and that to put on the respirator. So then he gave me a klal. And this is this important rule, and he tells me this all the time. This is Rav Asher Weiss's klal gadol in terms of respirators. Because the question is, when do you put a person on? So he says, if the patient, and the truth is I found this afterwards in Rav Sternbach's writing, a little bit worded differently, but the basic same idea in Chuvas and Hagos. He says basically, if a patient will have no chance or very low likelihood of getting off of the respirator, there's not a chiyuv to put them on the respirator. Meaning the point of the respirator is to be a bridge. The respirator, if someone's declining, the respirator can save their decline, help them stabilize, and we have many, many cases where people's lives have been saved because they were put on the respirator, even though the medical team didn't think they had a chance. We did it anyways. Their lives were saved. I can tell you more stories about lives that have been saved, and if we have time, I will, thanks to respirators. But if there is very strong likelihood, very strong, that they will not get off the respirator, and sometimes we have tests that can be done that show us that this person has no chance for a meaningful recovery. Of course, keeping in mind the story that I said before, there were people that said that kid had no chance, and they did. So we're obviously err on the side of caution and saving life. But he tells me if they have no chance of getting off the respirator, see, the concern is as follows. If a person gets on a respirator, the doctors say, now this is a little bit of a machlokas, skiing. How do you say researchers in skira? Whatever, it's a machlokas in the research. But they'll tell you in the hospital that you can be on an endotracheal tube, the ventilator, for 2 weeks. That's the rule in the hospital. After 2 weeks, they'll start giving pressure. You have to get off because why? The trachea starts to get infected, it starts to break down, and it can cause all kinds of secondary problems. And so they say our rule is 2 weeks. Now, it's not always the rule, and there are sometimes exceptions. Actually, I remember a case. This is another side point, but hopefully I'm just trying to give you some cases and some background. I remember a case we had, another important issue. There was a woman from the other side of town who collapsed at home, and her caregiver brought her into the hospital. She had an advance directive. Her advance directive said, no artificial life support. It's a dangerous thing to put on an advance directive, right? I think the best thing to put on an advance directive is your rabbi's phone number. That's basically it. There could be some other details, but the main thing is, I'm Jewish, call my rabbi. And if I have very strong feelings about one or two things, you write on there, here's how I feel about certain things, tell the rabbi for the rabbi to decide. That's how we actually wrote, we have a Jewish advance directive at Cedar Sinai, that's how we wrote it, that's how the Aguda advance directive is, and also the RCA. Anyways, she collapses, the paramedics come, they take her in, and they intubate her to save her life. Always, when in doubt, in emergency rooms will save life. I mean, that's what the American law is, at least. When in doubt, it's what you're supposed to do. When in doubt, you save life. And then after, you deal with the ramifications. In halacha, though, that can be a challenge, because sometimes you save a life, and then they're stuck on a machine. So this woman is now on a machine. Her advance directive says she does not want to be on it. There might have been a chance for her also to survive. So the doctor starts saying, well, we know her opinion. She said her opinion. It's in this document. So we're going to take her off. The family comes in. It was a very religious family. And they said, but this is against halacha. We called the rabbi. He said no. The doctor said, well, too bad. It's your opinion against her opinion. She's the patient. So they argued, an interesting argument. I mean, we kind of developed this argument in our meetings together. She was a firm woman also. She wrote something that goes against halacha, but she lived her life in accordance with halacha. So we argued, if she would have realized that she wrote something against halacha, she wouldn't have written it. So now we asked her rabbi says it goes against halacha. So she does not mean what she said. It's kind of a hard argument to make, but you can't ask the person. And even the doctors, from my experience, if you advocate enough for a patient, they don't want to fight, usually. They don't want the fight, they don't want the lawsuit, if you really make the case, there might need to be some compromise, but usually if you really make a strong, respectful, but passionate and informed case, they will say, okay, this is what you want to do. So we had a big problem though, because she's on a respirator. And the family felt we do not want her to be trached. See, this is what happens. You get 2 weeks, what they say, and sometimes it's longer, 2 weeks on the endotracheal tube. That's the tube that goes down one's throat into the lungs. That's the respirator. After 2 weeks, they say, okay, we can't leave it anymore. You need to be trached. So they extubate and they trach. They drill a hole into someone's trachea and they breathe that way. The truth is, it's more comfortable actually for a patient than imagine having a straw down your throat. In some ways, it's better. It's a minor procedure. It's a surgery, but it's done bedside. It's not the worst thing in the world. And but some people say, you know what? They leave the hospital at that point. They get sent to vent facilities. Like Barlow, there's these places right by Dodger Stadium. You might see that. There's places over there. They're not necessarily the nicest places. And some people feel like, you know, you end up there as a vegetable for 10 years, and people get nervous about that. This family in particular, they said, it's a common issue that people have. They said, we want to keep her alive. We're not okay with extubating. But we don't want to put her on a ventilator, on a trach, and send her to some facility to stay there for 10 years. That's not what we want either. So we said, well, we have a problem because that's your choice. But they said, well, halacha is we can't, right? So their posek, and the truth is we discussed this with him. I feel like I can share his name. It was Rabbi Cheskel Roth, one of the Satmar Dayanim. Actually, it was during Elul. And during Elul, he goes to Meron for the whole Elul. We had to track him down to Meron. It was like not easy. There was no cell phone or anything. Someone had to go. So they got to him, and he gave a very interesting psak, which we did. His psak was, Shev v'al taseh adif. How do you do Shev v'al taseh? The question is, you leave it in for 2 weeks, and then you take it out, and the patient dies, or you put him on a trach. There's two choices. There's no Shev v'al taseh.
Leave it in.
Yes, that's what he said. Leave it in. The doctor said, no, you get 2 weeks. So he said, fine, we're okay with taking the risks of those 2 weeks. Just leave it in, keep it in. He said, but it'll get infected. And they said, okay, why is that bad? They said, well, infections are bad. You don't want her to get infected. It would be painful. They said, are there pain medications? They said, yes. They said, could you leave it in and give pain medication? So we convinced the hospital that they did it. Now, this is what happened. They left her in. A lot of the staff at the hospital didn't like that. They thought we were torturing the patient. But we did it for this family to follow halacha and to hopefully help everyone to kind of navigate this. She was moved to a vent floor where she wasn't on a trach. She kept on the intubation. But what they did was, with their post-6 guidance, when she got the infection, they treated her with pain medication not antibiotics. And she died that way. It took 2.5 months, and she died on the respirator, still receiving basic nutrition, hydration, and basic and pain medications, but they allowed her to die that way, and they felt comfortable that that was not killing her, but allowing her to die.
He said we're brought to no antibiotics.
Yeah, that's how he guided them. Because he felt this is the only way that we're going to have any kind of compromise in this case. As long as they're not suffering.
The hospital wouldn't have allowed antibiotics, is it?
The hospital would have allowed antibiotics, but it would have been a problem because at a certain point they would have said, okay, we're going nowhere here. Like we have to go in some direction. So once they saw, okay, this is the plan. She's basically on hospice, but on a respirator, and that was the kind of the approach.
Stay in the hospital for like 2 months, or they go
In the hospital. Now there's been a change at Cedars-Sinai. It used to be 5 South was the vent floor. 5 South they said they now transfer these patients out of the hospital. So it would be a little different if it happened today, but it could still be managed. Anyways, that's another example. Yes.
The patient wasn't suffering, so then what should be that?
Okay, the patient was in a coma, right? The patient was not alert. So this is a big machlokas, by the way, with Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Elyashiv. Is a coma considered suffering? Rav Shlomo Zalman felt that a coma is considered suffering, and Rav Elyashiv felt that it's not. It's a big nafkamina, because we're supposed to prolong suffering. So to Rav Elyashiv, he felt, well, if the person's not suffering, what's the problem? To Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav Moshe, if they're suffering, you don't want a person to prolong. You don't want to prolong suffering. The Rav Moshe's klal is basically we do everything we can to prolong life, but we do nothing to prolong suffering. We cannot hasten death, but when someone's suffering, they have no chance of recovery, we can allow the dying process to occur.
The Pascal must be going in with their path, because if he truly was not suffering, then what would be the head not give antibiotics?
Yeah, must be. We didn't discuss that, I didn't talk to him directly. We were just getting this report back and forth. We had like a messenger reporting back to us everything. But yes. So then you have another issue with respirators. So there's other options. You might have heard about the timers on respirators at Shari Tzedek. The Tzitz Eliezer wrote a tshuva allowing a person to be put on a timer, because you always have this dilemma. When in doubt, with suffix, you want to save life, right? Halachically, in general, I think, but halachically for sure. So when in doubt, we want to save life. But we don't want to prolong suffering. We don't want to prolong the dying process. So there was this idea that came up with the Shari Tzedek that Rabbi Elyashiv wrote a tshuva supporting, which was that if someone comes into the emergency room and you're not sure, you put them on a respirator on a timer, and the timer will stop after 24 hours, whatever it is, and you can either decide to, before it stops, renew it to keep the person alive, or you can say, you know what, they have no chance of recovery, therefore, shev al tase, you can allow them to die by not renewing it. He wrote a tshuva allowing it. Some poskim did not agree. Rabbi Elyashiv didn't agree, for example, although it's not clear what he was disagreeing with, because there was different models of the timer, different ways of doing it. For example, Rabbi Elyashiv said you can't do it if you take a person off a respirator and then put them on the timer. But if you start them on the respirator on the timer, then they thought he was okay with it. Rav Sternbach has a tshuva allowing it. The problem is they have not been able to create the actual technology yet, because you have to have IRB approval to do something like this. You have to do tests. You have to have patients who actually are tested on. And no hospital is willing to test this on patients, because obviously it's dangerous. So they're still trying. I actually just discussed it with Dr. Steinberg last time he was here. They are still trying to create the technology, but it doesn't exist yet. I hear a lot when I hear people talk about this topic, the Shari Tzedek timer thing, but it's actually not real yet. It doesn't currently exist. There is another strategy which I will share with you, but again, sharing with you only with the recognition that you have your poskim here. This is something you have to discuss with the posting. Dr. Steinberg tells a story as follows. I forgot who it was. Navon, the president of Israel, Navon, right? His wife. When his wife was dying, she was on a respirator. He was farting, right? And he wanted to follow halacha in a certain way. Not that he was dati, but he asked rabbis. And Dr. Steinberg tells the story that when he came to him and said, my wife is stuck on a respirator. She's been on the respirator now for months. She's not dying because it's keeping her alive, but she's also not going to recover from it. And I feel that this is prolonging the suffering. Is there any way that halacha would allow us to extubate? So he went to Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and he wrote this in his life, in Rosh Shlomo Zalman's lifetime, in his name. The way he tells the story, I'll tell it to you the way he tells the story. Rosh Shlomo Zalman said, there's one way you could do it. which is that if the patient doesn't need the vent settings to be at their maximum settings. The ventilator does two things, right? It gives oxygenation, more than the 21% that is in the air, and it pumps the air. So if she doesn't require as much as it's doing, you can turn it down to the lowest level that she still needs. As long as it's still helping her. But then if she needs more later, you don't have to turn it back up. And as long as she needs less, you can keep weaning it down until it's at the lowest level possible. So that's what they did. So then he wanted to publish this. So he asked Rosh Shlomo Zalman, and Rosh Shlomo Zalman said, ask other poskim and see what they say before you publicize this. So he went to the Shevet HaLevi, Rav Vosner. And Rav Vosner said the same thing. So he said to Rav Vosner, can I publish this? Because this is an important psak. This comes up a lot. He says, I don't know, I'm not comfortable. He says, but Rosh Shlomo Zalman said the same thing. He said, yeah, fine, publish it in his name, not in my name. In the end, he published it in both their names together. But and then, actually, Rabbi Willig often would tell people this eitzah, and Rav Schechter told him that he disagreed with him. So Rabbi Willig felt very bad, because obviously he's going to defer to Rav Schechter. So he did until Dr. Steinberg published this. And this is how Rabbi Willig tells the story. When Dr. Steinberg published this, he said, okay, it's not me anymore. I can tell people to rely on that. That's the thing is, it's not always an option, this weaning off option. It's only in certain cases, and like I said, not all poskim are comfortable with it, something that you have to ask your poskim. It leads to another issue, and I'll start to conclude soon. Another issue that all this stuff with respirators now leads to, now that we have spent all this time being mivarer, all the stuff that's involved with it, and there's a lot more to talk about, another issue came up, a newer issue, and that is total artificial hearts. Cedar Sinai is doing the most heart transplants in the world now. And what happens is if a person needs a heart, they have heart failure, what it means basically is that their heart can't pump strong enough to get their blood throughout their body. So they need a new heart. But you can't always get a heart. You have to wait some time for a heart. But what if someone can't live long enough to get that new heart? So they developed an artificial heart. And it actually, the way to do it, it looks like a heart, but it's plastic. And they have to remove a person's entire heart and replace it with an artificial heart. Now, this is a big decision. If you think getting intubated or not is a big decision, as we discussed before, they actually have to remove a heart. And now the person's life is dependent on that heart. And guess what? Sometimes things happen that make a person no longer a candidate for heart transplant. Let's say we've had cases where someone gets an infection after. And the doctors say, okay, we were not willing to give a valuable heart to this patient who's already has sepsis. And they say, wait a second, then what does that mean for me? This heart can only last for so long. Or they get blood clots, which is common, strokes from these. Or we had a patient once who developed cancer after they got it, and the heart transplant protocols, they need someone to be able to likely live for at least 5 years after they get heart transplant, otherwise they were going to give it to someone else who can use it for longer. And the person goes off the list, and then they have to say, well, what am I going to do with the heart? What am I going to do now? Like, I'm in pain, I'm suffering, I have all these issues, and I have... What?
Can't give his heart back.
Can't give it back. It's gone. They literally turn it off. What do you think happens when they turn someone's heart off? They're gone instantaneously. It's not respirator, at least usually. I'll talk about this in a second. Respirator, usually there's some time. There's a whole another machlokas. Respirator, how long does a person have to be able to live after they're extubated for it to be allowed to extubate them?
How long does it live on the artificial heart?
Artificial heart, it depends. It depends. But let's say
But
someone...
it will be prolonged. Within years, it's going to be as much as an implanted heart. It will be.
It could be, but it
It
develops
would
all
be.
these
Not
side
could be,
effects.
It would be, because that's what the technology is
But
all
then they're
about.
getting all these side effects and they're having all these... Oh, no, yes, you're right. In terms of technology, yes. The FDA has even approved what's called destination, that it could be permanent, yes. But still, so what does someone do when they're dying and the only thing keeping them alive is this perfect artificial heart? So we've had patients, I'm not talking necessarily about people asking halacha questions. We've had patients who literally said, okay, if I have no chance now, they turn it off. And they literally go for a walk with their family, sit down in a chair, and they say, like, they turn them off. And it's instantaneous. And obviously, halachically, this is a very big problem, right? So the question is, even if you're going to put him on in the first place, once you put him on, can you ever turn it off? So if one accepts brain death, so there could be a case where someone becomes brain dead and you turn it off then. If not, and anyways, people often aren't brain dead. So how can it be turned off? There is the possibility of the Shea Valtase approach. These have a battery pack. You have to charge them. You think it's important to charge your iPhone, keep your heart charged. But so one option is, when we've actually done this, just allow the charge to run out. But it's a big question. I think I've written articles about this also. Does the heart, is it now your heart? Does it become part of your body, or is it external? And this leads to another shy that I'm just going to bring. I'm just giving some overviews, which is dialysis. It came up before dialysis. Dialysis now, and this we can start comparing and contrasting. Respirators, artificial hearts, and dialysis. Dialysis is basically does kidney function, right? There's two types. There's CRT, continuous renal replacement therapy, that is constantly, filtering one's blood. Or there's dialysis, which is the most common kind, which is like 3-4 times a week. One does dialysis for a few hours, it filters their blood, does the job of the kidneys, and they go on.
There's also PD.
There's a whole bunch. I'm not going to give too many details. Right. There's a lot more we can talk about. If we want to have a whole medical discussion, I'm not the right one for it, as I'm a rabbi. I only play a doctor. I don't play a doctor. So the question becomes in halacha, though, the halachic point is, what about dialysis discontinuation? Because respirator, we said, okay, if someone's vent dependent, right, extubation is a problem. There can be ways that we mentioned. What if someone will live for a few days? Artificial heart, they die right away. Dialysis, though, is cyclical, right? So if it's cyclical, shouldn't it be that in between cycles, one could, b'shei v'al-taseh, if the patient is in the dying process, and this is prolonging the suffering, they should be allowed. So interestingly, Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach took a different approach. He felt, like the speaker has great articles about this, Rosh Shlomo Zalman felt that the dialysis, even the dialysis, becomes the kidneys, because it's doing the function of the kidney, so it is the kidney, right? Just like if therefore the respirator is the lungs, and the artificial heart is the heart. This is a big debate. Also, by the way, side point, implantable defibrillators. This was a big trial. I think you wrote it to Rosh Weiss. It's published in his Chuvas. That what about a defibrillator that's inside one's chest, but it's only there to activate when one's heart stops? So can you deactivate it while it's not currently on? So apparently Rav Elyashiv ruled on this that you cannot, because it became part of the person's body. Rav Asher Weiss disagreed. He felt that when it's not acting, it's not acting. It's not actually part of the body. I think then Tzvika then disagreed with Professor Weiss, right? He had a back and forth. I remember that. But the point is about the kidneys. So Rav Shlomo Zalman said the dialysis machine is the kidneys. Therefore, even though it's off right now, you're not connected to it, you cannot stop dialysis because that is killing the patient, not allowing him to die. When I was at Weiner Yeshua that I spoke about, they were telling me, it was kind of funny actually, Rav Hoffner was telling me, I was telling him about Shari Tzedek. I spent a few weeks at Shari Tzedek at Weiner Yeshua. He said, here at B'nai Brak, we're much more machmir. We don't have all these Yerushalmi kulas. Remember that was his phrase. We don't have all the Yerushalmi kulas that they use there. And then I said, what do you do about dialysis here? He said, dialysis in between cycles, we stop if someone's dying. I said, in Yerushalayim, they don't stop because, not everyone, obviously, but Rosh Shlomo Zalman told the Shari Tzedek not to stop because it replaces the kidneys. So he said, I disagree, because his argument was Rav Moshe Feinstein has a fascinating tshuva, an important tshuva, that people think is not relevant today, but it's very relevant. The question is as follows. I'll tell you with a story. A rabbi came to my office once. We validate parking for the rabbis. That's why that was strategic. That's because we want you to come by our office. But it's important because I want to know what's going on. I want to know what's going on with people's patients. So a rabbi comes by my office and he's getting his parking validated. I say, what's the story? He says, we have a case with the extubation shaila. The doctors want to extubate. I think halachically, it's a problem, but I'm going to go tell them what to do. It's easy. I said, oh, really? Because this is a big challenge. When we have these cases, it's very difficult. What are you going to tell them? He said, what do you mean? It's so pashut. I'm going to tell them what Rav Moshe says. Rav Moshe says, when you change the oxygen tank, when it runs out, just don't replace it, and that's b'shei v'al-taseh, and you're not withdrawing, you're just withholding. And if the patient's really dying and it's that bad, I'll tell them in between oxygen tanks, just don't replace it. Any problem with that?
No tanks.
Yeah, there's no tanks anymore. Rav Moshe wrote that tshuva in 1970. It's not nowadays. It's plugged into the wall. It's continuous oxygen. So I remember I told this rabbi. I said, Rabbi, it's plugged into the wall. There's no tank. He said, Oh no! What do I say? What am I going to say? I don't know. I have to be there 5 minutes. What do I tell them? So it's a big issue. That's a big issue. So, anyways, Rav Hoffner there at Weiner Yeshua said to me, I'm a Talmud. My father was a Talmud of Rav Moshe. We apply that tshuva to dialysis as well. Actually, Rav David Feinstein, when he was here in LA, he was here in LA for the reference wedding a few times ago. So I caught him and I went up to him and I had all my shilas for him. probably annoyed him too much, but I got a lot of shilas to him. And I said to him, this has been said in your father's name about allowing dialysis in between cycles, not to restart it if the patient is dying and they're suffering. And I'm curious, do you think, was this really the position of Rav Moshe? He said, I get this shaila all the time, and that's what I say as well. So it's a machlokes, but another interesting one to discuss. Any questions or comments about any of this? Wrap up in a second. Yeah.
I just want to say, my father has COPD.
Yeah.
Very advanced. In the past 12 years, he was put on respirator and do stoma for about, I think, 6 or 7 times. And every time he has a wheezing, he comes out.
Yeah. See, it's important. It's important to know that there are not to give up too quickly. Exactly. Let me talk about 2 last things, and I'll wrap up, and I'll turn it over. Right. What did you want me to finish? So I see how fast I can talk. I'll just end it. Let's end it. Okay. So two last things, just to be aware of. One thing is DCD organ donation. There's lots of organ donation. Personally, I believe organ donation is a huge mitzvah. In many cases, it's a beautiful thing. In certain cases, living donors, donating a kidney, for example, pekuach nefesh, it could save lives. Cadaveric organ donation, there's instances where it can also be very important. DCD organ donation is one of the most common methods of organ retrieval, and you should be aware of it because it's halachically very problematic. The way DCD organ donation works is that a patient is determined that they have no chance of recovery, but they're alive. They're not brain dead, they're alive, but the doctor determined no chance of recovery. And the family or the patient has determined that they want to donate organs. So they take the patient to the operating room, prep them for surgery, and extubate and wait. And if they die, they start surgery. If they don't die, they reintubate, bring them back to the operating room. There's a story about this. Remind me another time, I'll tell you the story because it'll take me 3 minutes to tell the story. But it's something to be aware of. The last thing to be aware of that I'll just conclude with is surrogate decision making. One of the most common shilas that we have lately is making decisions on behalf of incapacitated patients. We have a lot of homeless patients at Cedars-Sinai, or patients who don't have any family, and they come into the hospital, and we have to figure out how to make decisions for a patient who we don't even know their name. And how do we make decisions when there's lots of different options? So this is another issue to be aware of, and lots to say about it, and we'll save that for another occasion. But again, thank you all for listening. Keep up the incredible learning. It's all be the halacha v'lo l'maisa, as they say. We should just know b'suras tovos and good health. Amen.
Amen. Shmaya, thank you very much.